Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me at the art table again today. And I'm back bringing you the review of Iconic Comics Common America Volume 8, End of the Second Saga. Before we get into that, though, let me remind you that this review is going to be divided into parts. I'm going to have a general review followed by a recommendation. Then I'm going to give a spoiler warning. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the construction of the story. I'll offer some critique, although really I'm more interested in breaking it down to see what makes it work in this case. I don't have a whole lot of critique to offer for this particular story, but because there's going to be that spoiler warning, and I do expect some people to leave so they don't get this, I have a few housekeeping things I want to take care of before we get in view. First, I have a short story being published in Anvil Magazine 2. And if you want to check that out, I will link to it down below. It's still available on Indiegogo for a few more days. Not sure quite how much longer, but I know that Richard has a final printing proof in hand and probably going to give the approval for the printer to start running that in the very near future, which means that pre-orders will be closing soon. Second, you may have noticed that I am calling this an Iconic Comics review rather than an Iron Age Comics review. What I've been doing for indie comics for the last year or so to kind of, give a nice bucket. I always found the Iron Age label to be a great way to say an independently created and funded creation without having to use so many words. But I'm changing it for Iconic Comics, something that I hope to continue to do as people become more grounded and established. Eventually, you have to admit that you are no longer looking at something as an independent creator. You're starting to look at them as a professional. And I really am starting to look at Iconic Comic projects as professional grade productions. They are keeping very well to a timetable. They are keeping very well to offering a great product physically as well as in storytelling terms. I think it's fair to hold them to a slightly higher degree of scrutiny. Not the level of indie guy trying to make it, but as the people who have really made it now and are trying to carve out their place in the mainstream. And it wouldn't surprise me if in 10 years or so, you hear of Iconic Comics being discussed in much broader terms than they are right now. Ditto for some other people who are trying really hard to carve out that spot. But I don't think that seen anyone else hit the level of consistency, that level of professionalism in dealing with their audience that the Iconic Comics has yet. And as more people start to hit those marks, as they start to show the consistency delivering product and in quality of product, I hope to be able to stop using Iron Age label them and start referring to them more broadly as their own brands. I think the people who are closest to that right now are probably the Rippaverse comes to mind immediately. They have been delivering very well, although as I've said in my reviews, I don't find their storytelling to be quite as good or consistent as what I've seen from Iconic. I think that they have a lot of promise in that direction. And hopefully, with another year to get their feet under them, we'll see the Rippaverse and Eric July's other publishing endeavors really transform from an experimental venture into creating comics to a really well grounded and professional company. They're certainly doing well on that front in a lot of different ways, but I don't think they're quite there yet. And that's fair. Iconic has been doing this for I think 5 years now. So, it takes a little while to get all those gears spinning, all the logistics worked out, and all of the talent in the places where they can do the best at what they do. So, I'm not throwing shade at anyone else here. I just think that Iconic has been really grinding away at it, really getting more and more professional and building a stronger and more enthusiastic audience, really clever marketing. So, this is not an Iron Age comic review. This is the beginning of the Iconic comic review. Because, hey, I think they are ready for that slightly higher degree of scrutiny. And, this particular volume doesn't do anything to disprove that notion. So if you think there's a twist coming here, well, spoiler alert, there's not. I do have a volume of Kindred Heavens for them on order, which I hope to be reviewing in the near future. And we'll see if they're doing as well cultivating new talent as they are in promoting their already pretty well-established talent. Now, let's get into the actual review here. This is a really good book. Physically, it looks great. has a nice, pleasing hardbound cover. Um, Paper stock is excellent as always. Now that I am discussing Iconic Comics, their own segment of comics, I'm just going to say it's up to the standard of iconic quality. They have always made a very, very good, pleasing product. And with that being the baseline, with this being what Iconic has already put out, I think it's fair to just say, yeah, they hit their usual quality marks. And I really don't think that there's a lot to offer by trying to overshoot this quality mark. A heavier paper really make for a better reading experience. Uh, a uh, what do they call it? UV stamped or silver stamped cover. I mean, those are nice, but don't spend a lot of time looking at the cover of a book while you're reading it, or even when it's on your shelf. I mean, I know I personally don't have the shelf space to turn all my books facing when they're on the shelf. Maybe if you have, hundreds of thousands of dollars to spend on dedicated rooms and all the bookshelves you do that, it might make a difference. But honestly, for most people, a really fancy cover is going to be turned, spine out most of the time. This is all you need, I think, for a really good book. I should mention, I also got the omnibus along with Volume 8, and this is just as good quality. I don't know if there's a slight difference to the weight of the covers on this compared to, maybe it just feels different because these covers are so close together. No, they're pretty much. So yeah, really good stuff. Got a little poster to go along with this campaign. Pretty nice. This is actually really good quality cards. It's really more like a card stock, it feels like, than your typical poster paper. I wouldn't want to roll this up and stick it in a tube like you normally do with posters. Maybe if it was a little longer, it would be more amenable to that, but I feel like I would crease something if I did it with that. So really something more flat. And also we got the equal trading card. This time around I got Common Unity. I don't know if these are randomized or if everybody gets the same one in a campaign, but they're pretty neat. I'm not into collecting, just collector's cards. I play a couple of card games that have collectible cards, but these have never really been a big deal to me, but it's nice to have if you're into collecting them. So let's talk about quality of the art. And Tim Lim pretty much mastered the art style he used in stories. It is actually, I've seen some of the Weldon art, Matt Weldon drawing one of the crossover books for next year. And it's a little jarring now at this characters in other styles. Like this cover, I believe is 8 Huza or Hachi Huza. I'm not sure how you pronounce that. An artist they know on Twitter. Unless it's double check here. Do have credits page. Okay. I'm not sure who the cover artist is. I believe it's 8 Huza. And it is a little weird. And I believe this is Eric Kanadi here. And they're very good illustrations, but they are jarring. Once you get, after seeing Tim Lim illustrate these characters for so long, it's very strange to see someone else illustrate them. It's a touch jarring. It, as someone who has a very distinctive art style, and has really put his fingerprints all over the series from minute one, I have a hard time picturing anyone else illustrate this now. And just shows in every panel the great sense of fun, of energy in illustrations. Does a good job making all the characters pop out from the background. The coloring is pretty good. I think if you compare the coloring in this to some other books, particularly the Soul Finder series, where the coloring is very subtle and builds a lot of mood, I think the coloring here is not quite up to that level. That's really the only critique I can offer to the book. And it is very comic booky coloring, which is totally appropriate for the kind of story and the general mood in these books. So, while it's not as subtle, it's a little blocky. It doesn't build quite as much mood and sometimes tension in the scene like you might see in something like a Soul Finder or a mainstream comic book. I think that's fine. I think it really works with what the story is doing. And technically, It's very very well executed. I just don't think it has quite the same level of storytelling that I've noticed in some other books I've gotten. Um, I used to have no eye for color, and I've because of what I do for work, I think I've had to develop a little bit more of one, so I'm noticing more of these. Maybe I'm just huffing my own farts a little much. Who knows? Who knows? All in all, great art style. There's some wonderful panels here. There's in particular a panel where we see Siggy throwing a punch that is just beautiful. The motion and force, power of the moment really comes off the page. I love it. Um, I really just hope that over time, Lim continues to find those little areas where he can upgrade his art and continue to make the story more expressive. Uh, Excellent work on that front. Storytelling wise, I really like this story. This is the end of a saga, so it's hard to talk too much about the story without a ton of spoilers. Um, your boy Siggy gets a lot of interesting stuff in this. Uh, like all the other Common America books, pretty much, we open on a flashback, except this flashback is more about Siggy than it is about Carly. Again, it involves their parents, involves an childhood where they learned a life lesson that is going to apply in a lot of different ways over the course of the story. But I feel really like Siggy's point of view is most important in the flashback. He has a lot of important moments in the story, which is very good. One of the critiques I offered of volumes 5 and 6, I felt like he was a little bit of an extraneous character at times in that series, and I wasn't a big fan of the way the love triangle was handled. Now, if you watch my review of Volume 7, you know that my opinion on that changed, and I felt that it was building to very quickly to a good resolution that made Siggy feel like he was an actual part of this story rather than, just a sideshow. And Volume 8 really cements that. Siggy is now in play. He's probably not going to don a costume and go gallivanting around with the Common Core, which is fine, frankly. But I think that his role in the story is going to evolve. And while I had faith that sooner or later Pellegrini and Lim were going to be able to write a good arc for him, I was worried that it was going to flounder longer than it did. And frankly, that worry was placed. Everything there works out pretty well. We get some great resolution for some dangling character threads in here. The entire Common Core comes together. They have a really great team moment. This book, in particular, pays off a lot of things that, over the course of the first 7 volumes, Pellegrini and Lim play with a lot of tropes of the Super Sentai genre. They play with a lot of tropes of, superheroes and comic books in general, and do a really great job of bringing all those tropes together in this book for some really, really solid payoffs for major character arcs that have been outstanding for the entirety of this saga. Very good stuff. Strongly recommend. Like I said, it's hard to talk very much about the story of this without spoiling something. So, at this point, I just have to give my general recommendation. Buy the book if you like this kind of superhero slash Super Sentai story. And if you don't, maybe it's not the book for you because it is really steeped in a lot of those tropes and traditions. And if you don't like those kinds of stories, probably not going to like this book very much. It is unapologetic about what it is. Not trying to deconstruct it or make it anything else than what it typically is. They just want to take this kind of story and execute on it really well, which I think they've done. So, if that's what interests you, definitely check it out. And if that's not what interests you, hopefully, I'll do something that would be more to your speed in your. I have a couple of other independent comics coming to me that I am looking for reviewing. So, spoiler talk. We are going to discuss all the things that happen in here. And if you haven't read this yet, I really do recommend leaving and coming back at another time. So, I said there are 2 major long-running story arcs that are paid off in here. Technically, there's 3. I think the love triangle between Carly, Misha, and Siggy is pretty much resolved by this book. And you can set that aside as well. That was a thread that ran all the way from Volume 4 to here. and I think it's resolved very satisfactorily. Um, no, none of the characters get demonized. None of the characters are flippant about the other's feelings. It's a very mature and well handled uh, romance slash love triangle situation. Almost never see these. They are almost always melodramatic and overwrought, or very simplistically handled. And I think Pellegrini managed to avoid that as writing this. Undoubtedly, Tim Lim had a lot of input in that, but he is credited primarily as the writer. And in the nitty gritty of writing a script, and a lot of this stuff is about that nitty gritty. He did a really good job there. The second story arc that is paid off is the fate of Vicky. Now, I predicted back in Volume 4 that she's going to prove to be one that looked like an enemy and turned out to be a friend, to quote the unofficial motto of Shonen Jump, and that she would fill out the 4 basic Greek elements and bring Earth to, which of course she does at this. She joins the team officially, while she still seems to be serving some time with the Spec Hops. She has a costume, she has a special weapon. It's pretty neat. What really pays this off is the moment before she makes the full face turn, right? It is the entire scenario here basically takes place at the Hoover Dam. We saw the team headed that way at the end of book 7, and here Vicky shows up to assist. She is initially in disguise as Vermilion Masquerade. She says she has to do this because it's the only disguise she can obtain these days. I'm not sure if that has to do with her powers or a sense of guilt, but she gets trapped trying to help some workers in a flooding part of the dam. She has this really emotional scene where she breaks down and she calls her dad. And this is, it can sound trite, right? Because her dad is trying to appeal to her better side. He's trying to get her to put away her guilt over the bad things she's done. We know that Vicky spent a lot of time not doing the things she wanted. And right now, that was kind of what drove her really to become a villain in the first place. She wanted to be a bit more of a girly girl. She also had an interest in art, not just geology. She spent a lot of time sculpting. She allowed herself to be shamed by her teacher, essentially, becoming a geologist and advancing the cause of women in science, rather than pursuing her artistic bent and her strong sense of creativity. And that is part of what led to her becoming Vermilion Masquerade. She saw the recognition Carly was getting with her superpowers and her use of her ability to sew and design fashion, and became very jealous. That's what led to her villainous downfall, right? And now her heroic rise is being prevented because guilt will not allow her to make a full face turn. She can't bring herself to really be the heroic person she always wanted to be. And I think seeing what her father says to her in that light, he appeals to her inner goodness. I always view the appeal to inner goodness with a great deal of skepticism, because I believe innate corruption of mankind. Our corrupt nature is a very dangerous part of who we are. Now, I know Lim and Pellegrini are both Catholic, so they understand that. And I think, therefore, you have to see that really what father is doing is knows she has been brought up with the principles that are supposed to stand against corruption. Just push to put them back in place, right? They were broken down by her bitterness and jealousy. Now her dad is trying to help her back up. And I think viewed in that light, this not trite. There is in the full context of Vicky's character arc, it does make sense. And one of the hard things of doing a serialized story like this is when you want to call back to Vicky's previous motivations and what drove her to play the villain in the first story arc, really can't bring them forward again without telegraphing what you're going to do. So I think the parallel construction we got all of Vicky's motivations in Volume 4 at the end of Saga 1, and now we're getting those that that parallel construction to those that reveal. We see the reveal of her father trying to build back up um, her good upbringing, her good motivation. I think if you look at it that way, very good construction. It is very good narrative, and of course, the danger of an episodic storytelling format like Common America, and it's been, I think, years since Volume 4 came out. There is the possibility people won't remember those threads and connect them as I think is intended in the volume. So yeah, I don't know if there's a good way to write around that though. Again, you could have that flashback to, but then you have the danger of telegraphing. Um, Now, part of that is in Vicky's dialogue with her father. I just, yeah, I don't know. I think that it's done as well as it could be, given the constraints of the format. And somebody who just reading omnibuses now that everything's published and available, I think it will be very clear to them. I don't know for people following this the whole time how obvious it's there. These are just things that, as you're writing a story, you have to think about them, and sometimes you have to accept that maybe not everyone will get it, given all the time and the different things that have been on their minds. They last touched base with Vicky, which I believe was in the Black Hops Common America Soulfinder crossover. It's the last time we've seen her character in any degree of prominence. Yeah, there's a lot of different parts in the final story arc in here that pays off is importance of the influence of Carly's family on her. Almost every volume of Common America begins with a flashback of some sort. Typically, not always, because I believe Volume 6 is a flashback to Sylvia and her father. Typically, it's an interaction between Carly and her father. And in this one, even though I think the emphasis was on Siggy, Carly and Charles, her father, were in that flashback and saw the relationship between them as well. And this is carried forward to the point where I thought it was just part of how the story was always going to be constructed. But big payoff to this is we actually where Charles Vander, one of the Denners, which is kind of like this evil, dark common that Sylvia, not Sylvia, excuse me, Cynthia Vander has put together, or not, okay. Cynthia Prestige, a lot of names, great. And Cynthia Prestige has put together the Denners is kind of a counter marketing gimmick to use against the common. And one of them gets caught in a situation where she's about to be electrocuted, and Charlie's father, jumps in the way of it and holds up a sheet of insulated metal to protect her. That kills him. And that was not something I was really expecting, because while the flashbacks have been used to build up Charlie's character, and there is in fact a couple of flashbacks between Charlie and her dad in this book, I never really thought that Charles was the kind of person spend a lot of time in the limelight. And even here, he's not in the limelight. This is something that happens as a sidelight, big things going on. And this is a very real tragedy, because we've seen over the course of 8 volumes how important it was that Harley's father be there to build her up, give her a strong sense of right and wrong, encourage her when things were tough, and of course to breathe fire at the reporters giving her guff, which Carly's had a lot of bad experiences with media. And by knocking out that support structure from under Carly, creates a lot of question marks in the story going forward. But it also pays off all of that setup. And how does it pay off a setup? How does it do that? Well, greater love has no man than that he laid down his for a friend. And, Center Techno was not even Charles's friend. She was just a person in trouble. And by showing us Charles doing this, we see that little life lessons that he's given Carly at the beginning of most volumes. These little flashbacks we've seen him giving her encouragement and direction are not empty. Charles really lives out those values. While it's probably going to be a lot harder for Carly to continue to uphold the values her father gave her in his absence, we know now, 100% certainty, each and every one of those lessons that he taught were sincere. And that powerful. They say that death of Jonathan Kent, a heart attack, is an important lesson for Superman. It tells him, even for all the power he has, he can't save everyone. And I think that this moment when Charles chooses to lay down his life, a stranger who's really working against the things that he values, is a lesson for Carly. And we can see, at least at the end of this book, she has a long way to go to learn it. She's going to have to learn that level of compassion and forgiveness and mercy for people that she does not like. And I don't think it's going to be easy for her. I think it's interesting that we see her make peace with Vicky in this book. And at the same time, her father dies, saving somebody she really doesn't like. She's managed to overcome the rift between herself and a friend. Next, she's going to have to overcome the rift between herself and an enemy. I think that's a very good setup for the next arc. Because while the automatons, which are villains for this arc, are pretty much dealt with by the end of the book, Cynthia not. And still has the Zenners at her disposal. But I think it's pretty well established that not all of the Zenners are really on board with the way Cynthia does business. And in particular, Zenner Techno seems to have been really moved by the fact that Charles saved her life at the expense of his own. And who wouldn't be? That's a pretty heavy thing to have dropped on you. I think these story beats and the way they are weaving together preceding story threads and coming story threads at the climax of a story that is resolving in a very satisfactory fashion in and of itself, is a real achievement of writing. I thought Volume 4, the end of the first saga, was a pretty good book. This is a truly great book. And it makes me look forward to all the other things we're going to see creative in the future. But all in all, if this was the end of the series, I would be a little disappointed that the outstanding threads with Cynthia are not yet resolved. Otherwise, a really great ending place. And that really says something. If every time you end a story arc in your series, you could also just end your series, have a very satisfying story, that means you've done a really good job telling that story arc. So, again, really great work. This is one book that I don't have any strong critiques to offer as far as the writing and storytelling goes. It's very well done. I enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to more. Let me know if you've read it, what you thought of the book down below. Did you think any of these major scenes could have been handled better? Do you think there's any connection of plot ideas that they could have done better? Or maybe think are just really well executed, but that I overlooked. I would love to hear about all of that. And while you're down there, if you feel like or subscribe, go ahead and do that with the button, and I'll talk to you later.